Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar dedicated to a topic that clearly rises a lot of interest, namely open-end finance lease as an alternative funding method arising from IFRS 16. Before we start, I would like to point out that the information shared within this webinar is subject to disclaimers which can be viewed in detail via the recording of this session, which will be shared on fleeteurope.com. Operational or closed-end leasing has a major advantage. From an accountancy perspective, it is an off-balance solution for the lessee. But that will change from 2019 onwards with the introduction of IFRS 16. From then on, all lease activities need to be registered on the lessee's balance sheet. This may increase the need to look for alternative funding methods, including open-end finance lease. In this webinar, supported by ARI Fleet, we will discuss the conditions under which open-end finance lease can be the right alternative to fund your fleet. We have the honor to have with us today two experts, namely Mr. Tino Gallert, Senior Manager at KPMG, who will shed a light on the new lease accounting standard, and Mr. Mike Stricka, Managing Director Europe at ARI Fleet, who will talk us through the specifics of open-end finance lease. I'm sure that you will have lots of questions during and after this webinar. We kindly remind you that you can always ask these questions through the chat function. We will gather them so they can be treated afterwards during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Mr. Gallert, thank you for joining us. I hereby invite you to take the floor.
Yes, thank you. As I was already introduced, my name is Tino Gallert. I'm a certified auditor and senior manager with the financial services department of KPMG in Frankfurt, and more or less covering all items of leasing, factoring, and securitization items when it comes to my daily business. And I have the great honor to give you some insights into IFRS 16, which will clearly influence the whole branch, and the main key points, just to give you a glance of what will change. Let's start with the introduction. What were the goals and objectives of the ISB? If you maybe know, the current or upcoming lease standard, IFRS 16, was in discussion for the last, let's say 10 years, and under development, and there were many models coming up to solve one major concern of the ISB, namely that more or less when it comes to operate lease, due to options and due to structuring leasing contracts, it comes to the point that not all lease contracts and not all information about lease contracts have been displayed or disclosed in the financial statements. And so, as you also know, we, under the current IS 17 regime or standard, especially for lessees, we have two different models. We do have the operate lease and finance lease models. So the operate lease is an off-balance sheet construction. The finance lease off-balance sheet construction, and the finance lease is an on-balance sheet construction. So the aim was definitely to have there a clear view and a more transparent, true and fair view of the financial statements. And so the ISB decided to issue a new standard that requires a lessee, especially, to take more or less all leases, let me say roughly around 95% of all leases, onto their balance sheet, and showing a so-called right of use asset. It will have a quite big impact on the key figures of lessees as well as on systems and processes, which demands some kind of effort in terms of evaluating the whole amount of lease contracts lessees have already and will close in the next future, and to restructure systems and processes just to monitor how lease contracts are closed within a company. For lessors, there wasn't seen the necessity to change major things. So for lessors, actually, the now actual dual lease accounting model with having finance lease and operate lease contracts will remain. So there are no major changes for lessors. The main impacts are definitely on the lessee side, having just a single lease accounting model. The initial application date for the IFRS 16 is January 1st, 2019. So from now on, let's say more or less 1.5 years, 1 year and 3 months. So if there has no action been undertaken the last time, it's really time to get on track to get this solved until this date. On the next page, we just illustrated the main differences. As I said before, on the IFRS 17, we did have on the lessees side the distinction between finance lease and operate lease contracts, which lead to the point that for operate lease contracts, that's the column in the middle, more or less all items that were leased under an operating lease contract were not shown on a balance sheet. There were just some information included in the notes. For finance lease contracts, of course, there were already shown the assets on the balance sheet and the liabilities as well, and of course some additional information in the notes. Under IFRS 16, with some exemptions, I will go into detail. You will show more or less all items on the balance sheet as well as the corresponding liability. What has mainly changed in terms of these definition and exemptions? Let's go to the other page, please. The ISB introduced a new lease definition. A contract or lease contract is or contains a lease if the contract conveys the right to control the use of an identified asset for a period of time in exchange for a consideration. That sounds quite similar to the definition we already have under IFRIC 4 compared to IFRS 17. But what are the key points? The key points to identify a lease is it an identified or identifiable asset? The second point is, does the customer obtain substantially all of the economic benefits? And the third point, does the customer have the right to direct the use of the asset? That means how and for what purpose is that asset used, and can he make the decisions? If all those questions are answered with a yes, then it's said, okay, the contract is or contains a lease. If not, then we don't have a lease contract, and the contract needs to be accounted under another standard, IFRS standard. Okay, let's go to the other page. I said something about exemptions. The main exemptions which provides the standard IFRS 16 are so-called short-term leases and low-value item leases. Short-term leases are lease contracts that have a contractual lease term of 1 year or 12 months. The thing is, with short-term leases, you have the choice to account for them under IFRS 16, meaning accounting for a right of use asset with a corresponding liability, but it's not necessary because it's the information coming from that is not really crucial. That means you can take them, short-term leases, off balance as well. The main point is actually the second bullet point, that options that are included in the contract, options to prolongate the contract or to terminate the contract, are really important to be assumed and to be protected. If there are any options to prolongate the contract and the decision will be to prolongate the contract actually, then you are out of the short-term lease definition, and you need to account for those leases within the right of use asset and a corresponding liability. Low value item leases is also an exemption. The standard setter said, okay, low value items like computers or laptops or other small items that has an individual value below $5,000 do not need to be accounted under a right of use asset and a corresponding liability. This means also as a portfolio. You can put all those items would have a single acquisition value of less than $5,000 in the portfolio, and account for them or do not account for them under the right of use assets regime. Maybe one hint or one thing: this exemption does not apply to sublease constructions within a group. So those items are then needed to be accounted under a right of use asset and a corresponding liability. However, if those exemptions are used, you definitely are required to make some explanations in your notes and in terms of value, and that you use those exemptions. This is still required. Okay, how does the right of use model look like? As I said before, it's not accounting the asset, but accounting the right of use for this asset, because you have the control of this asset. However, it's still this right of use asset is still displayed under your asset side, and more or less in those lines where normally the assets, like car or anything else, would have been displayed before. Accounting for the right of use model means you first need to calculate, or first needs to calculate the lease liability. Lease liability means fixed lease payments, initial direct costs, advanced lease payments, any obligations for reconstructions, if you talk about buildings, less any lease incentives. That's the point, or the valuation of the right of use assets. The right of use asset also needs to be depreciated on a straight line basis of the whole term of use. Maybe from a P&L perspective, compared to IFRS 17, you see it on the picture on the right side. You have a so-called front-loaded pattern of expenses. Means in the first few years, your total expenses will be higher than before, due to this interaction between depreciation of the right of use asset and the interest expense by calculating the lease liability on a present value base. A crucial decision point is the discount rate for calculating the lease liability, meaning which interest rate needs to be used. And normally, the standard says, okay, you need to use the interest rate incremental in the lease contract, which is more or less never been displayed. In that case, you need to apply the incremental borrowing rate, which is a common convention, actually. We have inserted a small example just to show you quickly how this will look like when we have the example leasing a car with a lease payment of €1,000, 24 months of lease term. and we have an incremental borrowing rate of 4.75%, means, okay, on the first step, we have to calculate a lease liability, which is shown with the present value calculation here, and comes up with a discounted lease payments over the whole term of 21,900 years. The corresponding right of use asset is similar to that by 1,000 euros higher. Why is that? It's because in our example you have an advance payment of 1,000 euros, which is deducted from the liability already. So means you account on your asset side for right of use asset, and on your liability side for lease liability. Right of use asset will be depreciated over the lease term, and the present and the lease liability will be also deducted month by month in this example by paying the lease payments. Okay, disclosures are also under the IFRS regime not getting less than before, and of course the lessees have to show in their notes, especially everything around their right of use assets. Means, okay, which assets have been recognized, what are the carrying amounts of the right of use assets, and how is the depreciation looking like. Interest expenses needs to be shown. The cash flow statements need to be explained in terms of those items coming up from this right of use model. I said in the beginning, we have also an impact on key figures of the financial statements, especially as you see when you come up from the IFRS16 regime. We have a quite big difference in terms of total assets, equity ratio, and EBITDA and EBIT. Maybe we go to the next page, then it's displayed. Yeah, so now we see, compared to IFRS17, you will see an increase, of course, of total assets and liabilities. That means the equity ratio will decline a little bit by this amount. But what's very interesting for many lessees who are steering their company under EBITDA and EBIT figures, EBITDA and EBIT will increase. That's due to the point that now, due to this depreciation and interest accounting in the profit and loss accounts, those items are not included in the EBITDA and in EBIT. So means those items are increasing. Also a positive impact on operating cash flows due to this new line setting of the different payments, how they are actually shown in the cash flow statements. Good. Okay, that's from the technical part of IFRS 16. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gallert. Before we move on to Mr. Strika's presentation, if you have questions for Mr. Gallert, please feel free to use the chat function. We will assemble the questions after the webinar and respond to them during the Q&A session. So, Mr. Strika, thank you for joining us, and I hereby give you the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. So in my presentation, I would like to talk about the opportunities that are arising from those accounting changes. And to make sure we start all from the same information level, many of the slides I'm talking to would describe a situation in Germany. There is no harmonized treatment of leasing or regulation. So therefore, it should cover 9 out of 10 topics for your country, but it covers 100% the challenges and the opportunities for Germany. On the next page, please. So a couple of words about our organization. ARI Fleet is one of the largest fleet management and leasing provider in the world. We are managing 1.5 million cars. ARI belongs to Home and Enterprise, which is a automotive services company that has around 5 billion revenue and is family owned. Home and Enterprises has two important pillars, which you can see. It's the Home and Consumer, Home and Business. I'm just going to pick three businesses. We are one of the largest dealerships in the United States. We are owning in Home and Business Services a company named Autotruck, which is building, assembling, and upfitting work trucks. And on top, we have ARI Fleet, which is active in North America, United Kingdom, and Europe. If anyone in the audience is interested how it feels to work for a company that has been for several years among the Fortune 100 best companies to work for, please send me your details. I'm going to share my experience. It is definitely great. Next page, please. That slide gives you a quick overview about the way the leasing and fleet management market has developed on the technical side, but same time, what we see on the gray line here is a kind of stagnation. Leasing came to the audience in the market, it became popular kind of in the 70s in Germany with the regulation, early 70s. And since then, the leasing products that are offered to the market have not changed. Leasing products that at that time had been fantastic, opportunities, alternatives to a classic credit financing, outright purchase, have been built for a sake of not having full information. There was no way for clients, for fleet operators to understand full details. So therefore, in the 80s and 90s, the model of closed-end leasing became very popular and has not changed in significance. Same time, we have seen in the market a strong development from, as said, the outright purchase to a more customer demanding tool, which now leads in the situation when we all talk about digitalization, and customers really can, if they want it, be absolutely educated on how costs occur and how costs can be avoided going forward. So there is definitely a mismatch between the technology, the market that is offering alternatives, and the leasing products that are offered by the lessor's side. Next page, please. So let's understand the conceptual difference between a closed-end operating lease and an open-end finance lease. The closed-end model is based on a defined end of life and the linear cumulative spend over the course of your agreement. The model was sold for many years under the horizon of simplicity. So you pay one monthly flat fee. The product was perceived as taking your residual risk away at the end of the contract. So you as a customer didn't have to care about market developments. You just gave back the car, and this was the perceived end of the journey. And what Tino just mentioned, it was perceived as an off-balance product, and that will definitely go away. If you click on the next page, please. What we all learned through technology, digitalization, and the data transparency is that the real costs that occur around a lease in a full service, so meaning financing and servicing, the costs are not that linear as the leasing companies try to sell them to the audience. The costs are more in a curve like you would see below the straight line. This is the actual behavior. This is the pay-as-you-go costs, because a car does not need maintenance in the first 6-12 months. A car has a different depreciation in the beginning than in the end. The market value versus book value changes over time. So there's different factors that clearly make this deviation from the straight line. If then on top, if you click one more time, please. If then on top, what we observed in the last years is there is strong deviation even from the straight line, because there's one-off events like early terminations, cars drive longer, more mileage, that makes contracts more expensive. You run flat tires, that may be charged extra outside of your perceived flat fee. So what we then realize, if you click one more time, please. What we then realize, the difference of the perceived price, which is the flat fee, and the real price is even bigger. So you see it's in the red it's in the red shadows, you will see what the real margins of a lease companies are. The margins, yes, there are safety margins, safety belts for the lease companies, but there is also strong opportunities to create additional income during the lifetime of a vehicle, which is absolutely classic for a full service leasing contract. If you click one more time, please. So I just mentioned the topic of simplicity. One second, my screen just disappeared. Just a second. One second. So I'm back. So what we realized, the product is not as simple to manage as many customers think, because customers are permanently on the back foot to understand how the leasing companies potentially can make more money. They negotiate damages at the end. They negotiate early termination. So a product that has been perceived very simple is rather a complacent product where customers are not forced to think about additional cost expenditures that are not budgeted. The residual value risk that is sold as an absolutely unmanageable risk comes out to be an artificial risk. And as said, the off-balance situation goes away. What you should focus on in the future as a customer in closed-end leasing is rather on the green spots on that picture. You should focus on single events to optimize your real cost behavior instead of negotiating perceived fixed prices with a full service leasing company. If you go on the next page, please. One more. One more, please. Can you click one more, please? Okay. Let me walk you on that slide just through some technical features of an closed-end and an open-end finance lease. So the term in a closed-end leasing is fixed. When an open-end finance lease, it's you as a client who decides when a car will be brought back to the leasing company. You decide fully flexible how long you would need the car and when to terminate a contract. The remarketing profit in closed-end leasing stays to 100% with the lessor. When an open-end finance lease, the profits of remarketing go to 100% to a customer. In the terms of termination, you can terminate in an open-end anytime with no contractual penalties and no prepayment penalties. I'm going to walk you later through some detail. On the accounting, we just learned from Tino, the accounting that was off balance today is going to be on balance in closed-end too, like it is for open-end finance lease already the case. The legal owner is the same in both scenarios. And at the purchase option, the open-end finance lease customer can decide to keep the car, to sell the car through the remarketing channels of a provider of the lease company. So full flexibility on that decision too. If you move on the next page, please. So let me walk you through a classic contract. I took an example of an LCV, a leasing term of 72 months with expected 30,000 kilometers a year. The cap cost, the net list price less discount, is 40,000 euros. And as Tino just mentioned in his presentation, we need clear transparency on interest rate, depreciation, repayment, and that is absolutely transparent in an open-end finance lease. So you would see you still have a fixed flat rate of 609 euros, and the leasing company would simply disclose the portion of repayment that is growing over time as the portion of interest rate goes down. In whatever moment in the life cycle of the car, you can compare your outstanding debt to your leasing company against a market value. And when you feel like in that example, month 48, you want to give the car back, you compare the outstanding debt of 14,000 euros 32 against the remarketing value of 14,400, which leads to a profit for you of 368 without additional penalties. You just walk away from the deal. So that is very important. We have full transparency on the interest rates, like Tino just mentioned. We have full transparency on depreciation, and you are absolutely in the driver's seat of when do I want to give the car back? Do I want to extend it, or do I want to keep the car longer? Next page, please. Let me walk you through 6 areas of the life cycle of a vehicle and let you understand how would a closed-end behave in that situation versus an open-end finance lease. We start with repair and maintenance. If you click on the next page, please. So in a closed end, the complete process is managed by the leasing company in a perceived fixed maintenance budget. It gives you perceived planning security. So you pay for your Audi A6, the 80 euros a month, and that is the price you think you're going to pay over the next 3 years. In an open end, you can manage that process by the leasing company, an external fleet manager, or even with your own team on a pay-as-you-go basis. There is no margin in the budget. There is no safety belt in the budget. You actually only pay what you need to pay and what you consume. In a closed end, typically the real budget versus the budgeted ones is not disclosed. Where on an open end, you have full cost transparency. You actually know on every single license plate how many liters of oil have you consumed and how many maintenance visits did occur for the car and how much money did you spend for that. So bottom line, it is a very limited opportunity for you in a closed-end scenario to influence the real costs. You cannot really drive down costs. You cannot decide where and why you want to repair a car. Is it an independent chain? Do you really have to go for that service? And you cannot control any margins in that event. So the risk and opportunity is with the lessee, but I'm talking about the opportunity because the risk is only perceived in a classic closed-end leasing. We're talking about a 10 to 15% maintenance margins. Let's talk about the next page. What happens in the case of an early termination? Early termination, if you click one more time, early termination, can you click one more time, please? In an early termination, the cancellation after 24 months would lead to the fact that you are deemed to pay a rather intransparent calculation, outstanding interest rates, outstanding lease payments, plus a deduction of market versus book value, where in the open-end finance lease, after 24 months, in a contract that was planned to be 48 months, you hand back the car and there is no additional penalty for you. You have the full flexibility. You are knowing upfront what exactly you're going to be charged. It's exactly the time you had used the vehicle, and it's not a penny more than that. If you go to the next page, please. What happens in a contract adjustment? Take the green bar as a starting point, 100,000 kilometers as a starting contract. 6 out of 10 contracts in Germany and Europe get at least once rewritten because drivers don't meet the expected mileage duration combinations, because people drive less, more, are off sick, or get new sales regions or service regions. What happens here is you have a new driver behavior of, instead of 100,000, you go to the blue bar of 75,000. The lease contract gets adjusted and you get a perceived cost reduction here. If you would have chosen the 75 from the start, the white bar is the price you would have paid. So instead of having a cost saving, a contract adjustment is a missed opportunity for you, and its addition, it's a cost increase. What happens in the open end? In the open end, same story, 36 months, 100,000 kilometers. The expected market value for that car is 10,000. If you only drive 75, the car will be worth 2,000 more in the remarketing channels. So there is absolutely no margin walk up possible for a lease company. You are in full control because you don't need to rewrite contract unless you want to do it for the sake of reducing your budget or the cash flow. So there's absolutely full transparency and no additional margins in the product. If you go to the next page, please. Tacit extension, also known as silent extension. What happens in a closed-end contract? A car that was planned to be 36 months on lease rate of 500 euros. if you go for replacements, nowadays, you typically will have a delay of 1 or 2 or 3 months. So it means the car will stay 2 months longer with the leasing customer, which then leads to 2 additional payments, 18,000 plus 500 plus 500 to sum up to 19,000 euros. In our scenario, in open-end lease, you still pay the first 36 months, the same 18,000 euros. You then just add 2 additional payments, which help you to reduce the residual value credit and will help you to achieve more money on the used car market. So the 1,000 euros you paid on the left box turn into a saving of 741 in the area of an open-end lease. Same story here, absolute transparency, and you are in control. What happens on a damage settling? When a contract ends, typically there are many discussions going on. Does a lease company treat my damages fair? Am I overpaying? Are there margins added? And I don't think that's the right discussion you should have. You should simply have it like in an open end. There is absolutely no damage bill you're going to get presented because it is your car and you are the beneficial of any remarketing proceeds. So what we've seen, I've just picked one out of a real life example, a transporter, 59 months old, 240,000 kilometers. The sale price was 5,000 and the customer got a damage billing presented of 1,600 euros. When we understand the real remarketing impact for that vehicle was below 800. So also here you pay 800-900 euros too much. It is absolutely the same process with a big difference, no additional margins possible for a lessor. Next page, please. What happens in the area of remarketing? In the closed end, the remarketing is simply a black box to the lessee. You don't really understand how much money leasing companies make. And to all my colleagues from the closed end leasing companies that are on the telephone call now, I would be happy to have an open discussion what the remarketing profit was over the last 4 years per single lease contract. Those were very, very generous and massive to the leasing companies. In an open end, all remarketing profits stay with the leasing customer because you sell the car to your best benefit. There is absolutely no way that a dollar, penny, or euro goes in direction of a leasing company. It all stays with the lessee. Next page. Okay. So for me, it's very important, one more time to summarize. I worked 15 years in the closed-end leasing industry, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm now bitching to my former colleagues. I just want to be very transparent and discuss there is an alternative. The alternative now got backwind through the IFRS changes. The alternative is existent in the US market since 20, 30 years, and it's dominating over there. If you really want to reduce your cost by 20%, then you should clearly look into the option of an open-end finance lease. If you prefer to pay too high TCOs, if you love inflexibility, and if you love intransparency, then closed-end leasing is the right product for the future. That picture I'm showing here gives you just the understanding that the red box on the left bar is an area of walk-ups of intransparency that simply can be taken away day one, plus you have all the benefits, plus you have the full flexibility, which leads to potential savings of 20%. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strieker. I'm sure the participants have already learned a lot, but perhaps they still have some questions. If so, please feel free to use the chat function. We are now moving on to the last part of this webinar, namely the Q&A session. We have already gathered quite a few questions, and the first one is for Mr. Gallert. First question is, do you find customers not discounting monthly rents when calculating right of use in order to simplify accounting entries and avoid mismatch? So are there customers that are not discounting monthly rents when calculating right of use in order to simplify accounting entries and avoid mismatch? Mr. Gallert.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, I don't know any customers from my side, or also when I want to talk to the market, that do not discount the monthly payment. The thing is, I know it's a big question, and also a decision-making process in terms of which interest rate needs to be applied. However, if there's no discounting process, then of course it's then of course you don't apply the standard in the full, and so this could also lead, for example, to an audit misstatement. It's also a matter of materiality, of course, but I don't see any clients who are not discounting those payments.
All right, thank you. I think the next question is also for you, Mr. Gallert. One of the participants assumes that rental vehicles for use of up to 12 months could become more popular if off-balance sheet is important to an organization. So I'll quickly repeat. So the question is, would it be reasonable to expect that rental vehicles for use of up to 12 months could become more popular if off-balance sheet is important in an organization?
Of course, this could be an option to have 12-month contracts, and it's also a decision-making process, of course, in terms of what is the strategy or the lease or finance strategy. Of course, but that's more or less something the colleagues from the lease companies also rental companies need to answer. So those contracts, I think, would be more expensive than long-term contracts. That's another decision. And if it is applied, just coming back to my points I mentioned before, then there should be some caution in terms of prolongation rights in terms of the lease term.
Okay. One more question for you. I think the topic is really raising a lot of interest. So the participant says that some fleet operators are looking into deducting right-of-use amounts with driver-paid monthly contributions. What would be your point of view on such a deduction?
Actually, this could be observable. I haven't made this experience as of now, but could be an option, and maybe it's observable in the fleet industry. Yeah.
Okay, right. I have one for Mr. Stricker. Whilst transparency is clearly wanted from customers, is a predicted trend towards a more ownership-based product not at odds with the clear trend towards, and then I need to scroll down a bit.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I will repeat the question. There was a small hiccup. So whilst transparency is clearly wanted from customers, is a predicted trend towards a more ownership-based product not at odds with the clear trend towards usership over ownership? Is this not further backed up by the pace of change in vehicle technology?
So I think I don't see them competing, the scenarios you just mentioned. I think the open-end leasing combines the benefits of usership and ownership, because you are treated like the owner, because again, all benefits, all proceeds stay with you, and same time you only pay what you use. And I don't see that in a competing range. I don't see the product being wrong for the changes in the market. If you talk, for example, about electric vehicles, the big issue for electric vehicles, why are they not popular? Why they're not successful in terms of TCO? Because lease companies, they are not really clear how to set up an RV. In the way we do it, there is no risk margins baked in. It is simply what you use, you're going to pay. So therefore, I think with electrification, IFRS changes, but also the trend changes in the market, the open-end finance lease is going to be the product for the future for Europe. I bet 100%.
Okay, thank you. One more question, this time about transparency, also for you, Mr. Stricker. Do larger customers not already get transparency and the chance to participate in windfall profits, between brackets, without the risks associated with a more ownership-based model?
So larger customers today, and I think the question should go back to the audience, the closed-end leasing companies. A closed-end leasing company today makes around 25 to 35% return on a leasing contract, and the return is something customers have paid. In the closed-end leasing, customers live under the impression that the only margin they pay is maybe a disclosed management fee and an interest rate spread, where this, in honesty, is only 20% of what leasing company makes the money. So I'm not sure that large companies really have the best possible TCO. We just did some analysis and we really understand, depending on your current scenario, if you go for the pay-as-you-go services, you are reducing double digits the cost. If you take the model, you have no penalties at damage, you have no early termination penalty, you get all the proceeds and you have the full flexibility. That saves you again up to 10-15% on the financing piece only. I would be super surprised if I can find a customer in Europe who can clearly claim that on an LTV above 40 months, he can have a better deal with a closed-end contract than in an open-end facility. And this has nothing to do with ARI, that's simply the product as it is. If you compare the margins of a lease company in the United States versus Europe, you would also see dramatic differences. The leasing companies in the US, they make not even 50% of what a leasing company makes in Europe, Germany, or any country here on the continent.
Okay, thank you. One more question for you, Mr. Stricker, about the residual value risk.
Yes.
So if the customer is participating in gains and losses at the point of remarketing, then should the customer in an open-end leasing solution have to assess the residual value at a regular basis? So is that not something that the customer has to do, be in touch with the market and follow up the market on a constant basis?
That hopefully is done by your provider. So there is scenarios, if you own the cars, you can run them with your own fleet management team or an external provider. If you do an open-end finance lease, the open-end finance lease company in the United States does nothing else than the closed-end leasing company in Europe, with a big difference. They just open up the scenario for the customers. They tell customers, now it's right time to sell the car because now it's time for profit. If you're underwater, then you give them a recommendation, drive the car 1, 2, 3, or the truck, the LCV, 2, 3, 4, 5 months longer to be above water again. Where in the closed-end world, the leasing company did exactly the same thing in the year of 2010 and 11. Everybody who was in the industry at that time remembers that the leasing companies begged on their knees to customers to extend contracts because they had the losses on their backs. And what customers did, they helped the leasing, they bailed the leasing companies actually out. So there's absolutely no difference in the behavior. What is the benefit? If you have a strong partner to your side, a leasing and fleet management company, that company would tell you when is the right moment to sell a vehicle, when do you make more money on the resale than you owe credit.
Okay, that's clear. One more question for you. I think, Mr. Stricker, you have really touched an interesting point here. One of our participants asks, in the case of open-end leasing, well, he says it almost sounds too good to be true. Why would the lease companies sell this product?
You know, it's the same when Mr. Steve Jobs came over to Europe with a smartphone. Everybody thought it sounds too good to be true. People were sitting on Blackberries and Nokia, and we know what happened. It is simply the fact in the US that model has won the race 30 years ago. the market in Europe, the leasing market, is dominated by banks and OEMs who absolutely had no interest to open up. I was part of an international leasing company, and in the year of 2010, we did a review. Can we move our European portfolio into an open-end scenario? And the reason why the lease company after the crisis felt not sure we want to be in that market any longer, the outcome was we're going to earn 50% less in an open end, and that was the end of the project. With all the benefits to us for customers, the 50% profit reduction was the end of the story. And again, there is a good reason that product closed end was fantastic for 10, 20, 30 years. With the technology we have today, it is not to be good to be true. It is simply the truth. You know, the world is not flat, it's round. You know, 2,200 years ago, there was a guy called Eratosthenes, and that guy came up, when everybody felt the world is flat, he came up with a different view. And it took a couple of years until everybody really strongly believed, and that's what we learn today in university. I can tell you, I'm very convinced in 10 years, we're going to have the same webinar. The market is going to be 80% on open lease, because customers will get tired of paying too much, of being inflexible, and they just want to enjoy the benefits that the US market already has since around 30 years.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stricker. And one final question, that's for Mr. Gallet. It's about the reason why open-end lease, finance lease, is to be treated through the balance sheet, because apparently there's quite a few participants who don't really see why an open-end finance lease is to be treated differently from a standard operating lease in terms of balance sheet. Maybe you can explain, Mr. Gallet.
Okay, the thing is, actually, if you have an open-end lease contract, first is it a true lease? Yes, I think it is. And the other thing is, okay, do you really are you able to calculate or to assume the lease term at the end of the day? So as we are talking of about the finance lease in the future, I think as it was introduced before, there will be a change in the accounting, and it will be on balances as well.
Okay. But are there specific characteristics in the open-end finance lease that make it necessary for them to be treated on balance compared to the way we know operational lease today, or is that something that will be changed in general?
The thing is, yeah, that's a general point, because this distinction, especially for lessees, I'm now talking from a lessee perspective, actually, this distinction between operate and finance lease is not existing any longer under IFRS16. It's so you don't have this differentiation between operate and finance lease. You have a lease. And if you have a lease and the right to use the asset, the right to use the asset, to control the asset, then you have an on-balance sheet accounting. Or
okay.
There's the point in the future.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we have reached more or less the end of this webinar. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We hope you appreciated it. Of course, also thank you again, Mr. Stricker and Mr. Gallet, for joining us and shedding a clear light on this topic. And of course, thank you, ARI Fleet. As mentioned before, a recording will be available afterwards on our website, fleeteurope.com. Before we leave you, let me stress the fact that we value your feedback. So please take the time to complete the survey and share your thoughts on today's webinar, and also on what you would like to bring us in the near future. From us at Fleet Europe, thank you and goodbye.